The great hall felt too large for Harry's ribs. It wasn't merely the ceiling bewitched into a star-crowded night, though that alone made his throat tighten. It was the pressure of being seen, the weight of hundreds of eyes that had already decided somehow that his face belonged to them. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the other first-years, the hem of his robe brushing against Ron's fraying sleeve. Ron was staring up at the candles as if he expected one to drop and prove the whole thing was a trick. Hermione, on Harry's other side, kept smoothing her hair with a quick, anxious hand, eyes darting over the tables as though she were memorizing a battlefield. At the high table, the teachers sat like carved figures in a tapestry that had come alive. The old man in the center, Dumbledore, looked as if he had stepped out of a story told to children who didn't know how sharp stories could be. His eyes crinkled at the corners, fond and bright, but he did not look small. Professor McGonagall set a three-legged stool before them with the care of someone placing a crown on a pillow. Upon it she lowered a battered, patched hat that might have been dragged through a dozen fires. For an instant, Harry couldn't imagine anyone making a fuss about it. It was just cloth, just age. Then the hat split at its brim like a mouth. It began to sing. Harry had expected, if anything, something grand and triumphant. The song was older than triumph. It was the voice of a thing made in a time when castles were raised against enemies that meant to burn them down. It sang of founders, of choosing, of sorting hearts into corners of a fortress so the fortress would hold. Around him, the older students listened with the easy boredom of tradition. They'd heard this before. They knew the notes. They knew the joke that would follow when nervous first-years were marched up and sentenced to one table or another, for better or worse, for the next 7 years of their lives. Harry tried to breathe. He tried not to think about the letter that had changed everything. He tried not to think about the whispers on the train, the way strangers said his name like it was a spell. The hat's song slowed, then dipped into silence. McGonagall's posture stayed rigid. She read the first name on her parchment, Hannah Abbott, and beckoned. Hannah climbed the steps as if she were walking to her own execution. The hat lowered over her eyes. For a heartbeat, the great hall held its breath. Harry felt his own heart answer it, thudding too hard, too fast. The hat twitched. A pause. Another pause. Too long for comfort. Then the hat spoke, not in a shout, not in a theatrical flourish, but in a voice that carried the cold authority of a door bar sliding into place. No. Die. The word was plain. It was not part of the ceremony. It did not belong. Laughter fluttered at one of the tables and died the moment McGonagall's eyes cut across the hall. Hannah sat frozen beneath the brim. Dumbledore leaned forward slightly, fingertips steepled, as if he had heard something interesting rather than catastrophic. McGonagall's voice was low. Sorting hat. The hat's brim flexed. No. Hannah's hands trembled in her lap. Harry couldn't tell if she was about to cry or bolt. McGonagall reached as if to lift the hat off, only to stop mid-motion, as though she had encountered an invisible wall. Her fingers hovered, then withdrew. Snape's black gaze sharpened, thin as a knife. The hat spoke again, and this time it was not merely refusal. It was judgment. I will not. A sound moved through the hall like wind through a graveyard, low, hungry, uncertain. The students at the long tables leaned toward one another. Plates clinked. A goblet tipped and rolled, forgotten. Harry's skin prickled with a strange certainty that everyone in the room could feel a spell settle into place, like a latch closing. McGonagall's knuckles were white around the parchment. She did not look at the teachers. She looked at the hat as one might look at a misbehaving wand that had suddenly become dangerous. Sorting hat, she said, each syllable clipped. You will do your duty. The hat's brim rippled in what might have been laughter, if laughter could be ancient and tired. My duty, it said, is older than your parchment. There was no malice in it. That made it worse. Malice could be punished. Malice had motives. This was something else. An enchantment following rules that did not care about embarrassment or tradition. Dumbledore rose, and the motion drew eyes like iron draws filings. He did not raise his voice, but it carried. "Hat," he said gently. "Hogwarts welcomes its new students. It has done so for 1,000 years. If something has gone awry—" "It is not awry," the hat interrupted. The tone hardened, and Harry felt it again, the latch. "It is fulfilled." McGonagall's lips thinned. "Fulfilled." The hat's voice lowered, resonant enough to vibrate in Harry's teeth. 4 founders raised 4 walls inside one castle. The walls were meant to hold, not to become prisons. You have made the walls into banners and the banners into blades. A few older students scoffed, but their scoffs came out too thin. Someone at the Slytherin table laughed outright, a sharp, delighted sound, as if the idea of chaos pleased them. Harry saw Draco Malfoy's pale face tilt toward the dais, eyes bright, hungry for spectacle. Hermione's hand shot up, absurdly, as if she were in a classroom. She seemed to realize at once how ridiculous it looked and lowered it, cheeks pink. Still, her eyes were fixed on the hat with feverish attention, like she wanted to argue with it, like she wanted to take notes. Dumbledore's gaze moved, briefly, to Hannah, still trapped beneath the hat. "Hat," he said. "The child." "The child will not be sorted," the hat replied. McGonagall's voice sharpened. "Then remove yourself." Again she reached. Again the invisible resistance held, not forcefully, but absolutely. The air between her fingers and the hat might as well have been stone. Snape rose in a single fluid motion. His robes barely whispered. "Headmaster," he said, and there was something in his tone that was not quite deference. "This is ancient magic," Dumbledore finished softly, as if naming the beast stole some of its teeth. He looked back at the hat. "Explain." For a moment the hall went so silent that Harry could hear the candle's faint hiss. The hat spoke into that silence. "I was made to choose when choice was necessary," it said. "I was made to place children where they might be shaped, protected, challenged. But I was also made to listen. I have listened for centuries." Harry felt Ron's elbow bump his. Ron's eyes were wide. He mouthed, "What's it doing?" Harry shook his head, too numb to answer. "I have listened," the hat repeated, "as your houses became more than guidance. They became inheritance. They became armor. They became excuse." "No." At the Hufflepuff table, a girl wiped her eyes. At Ravenclaw, some students leaned forward like predators scenting a puzzle. At Gryffindor, someone muttered something angry under their breath. At Slytherin, laughter again. Quieter, more measured now, like knives being sharpened in the dark. Dumbledore's voice was steady. "And what would you do instead?" The hat's brim curved, not into a smile, but into a grim line. "I will not sort." McGonagall breathed in, and Harry saw control slip a fraction. "You must." "No," said the hat. "Not tonight. Not this year. Not until Hogwarts remembers it is one school." "Nun. Dharma." Hannah made a small sound, a hiccup of fear. Dumbledore's eyes softened. "Then," he said, "we will find a way to welcome them regardless." The hat's voice was almost approving. "Doe." And with that, the resistance vanished. McGonagall snatched the hat off Hannah's head as if it were burning. Hannah slid off the stool on unsteady legs and stumbled back toward the first years, half running, half falling into the cluster. The hat hung limp in McGonagall's hands, ordinary cloth again, battered and patched. But Harry could still feel the latch. It should have ended in applause, in names shouted and tables banging, in the great communal relief that came from being told where you belonged. Instead, the hall swelled with the unease of a crowd that had lost its script. McGonagall gathered herself as if she could stitch the moment shut by force of will. She set the hat, carefully, too carefully, on the high table, as far from the first years as possible. It sat there like a dead animal. Dumbledore remained standing. He lifted his hands, not in command but in quiet invitation, and the murmuring eased in reluctant steps. "My dear students," he said, "tonight has offered us a surprise." A few snorts answered him. Somewhere in the hall, a girl's laugh cracked on nerves. Dumbledore's eyes swept over the tables, and Harry had the peculiar sensation of being seen not as a story, but as a child with cold hands and a stomach full of dread. "Hogwarts," Dumbledore continued, "is a castle of many magics. Some are new. Some are ancient beyond our measuring. We are not the first generation to be challenged by the castle's will." Snape's mouth twitched as if the phrase displeased him. Dumbledore's voice stayed warm. "Tonight, the Sorting Hat has exercised an enchantment bound into its making. It refuses to sort this year's students." The words, spoken plainly, turned the murmurs into something sharper. Angry, excited, afraid. "And so," Dumbledore said before the hall could riot, "we will proceed in a manner that suits the first purpose of this school, learning." At the staff table, McGonagall's jaw worked as though she were grinding down an argument. Flitwick looked fascinated, tiny hands clasped, eyes glittering. Professor Sprout's face held worry like weather. Snape watched the first years as if weighing them. Beside them, a stranger sat, robes neat, hair pinned, a ministry badge catching candlelight. She looked out over the hall like a banker assessing a debt. Dumbledore gestured, and the doors at the far end of the hall opened. House elves emerged like shadows, setting down platters in a swift, silent tide. Roast chicken, bread, potatoes that steamed as if freshly pulled from the earth. The smell hit Harry's empty stomach, and he realized he had not eaten since the train, not properly, not with fear tightening his throat. The feast appeared upon the tables as if the castle itself had decided that even rebellion should be well fed. "Eat," Dumbledore said, smiling. "For tomorrow we will discuss arrangements." Arrangements. Harry clung to the word as if it were a plank in deep water. The older students began to eat, though less heartily than usual. Heads leaned together. Rumors were already breeding, fat and quick. Hermione's voice came in a whisper. "This isn't in Hogwarts, a history." Ron's eyes remained fixed on the hat. "Can it do that?" Harry swallowed. It just did. Across the hall, Draco's gaze slid toward Harry like a cold finger tracing a scar. He said something to the boy beside him, Crabbe or Goyle, and the boy laughed too loud, too stupidly. Draco didn't laugh. He simply watched. Harry tried to eat. The chicken tasted like salt and comfort, and something he didn't trust. He could barely force it down. "Maybe," Ron murmured, chewing like it was a chore. "Maybe it's because of you." Harry's fork halted. "What?" Ron's ears went red. "I didn't mean, just everyone's been talking about you." And then the hat. Hermione's eyes snapped to Ron. "Don't be ridiculous. Hogwarts doesn't reorganize itself because of one student." Ron opened his mouth, then shut it. He looked ashamed and still half convinced. Harry stared at his plate, appetite fading again. He had lived 10 years being blamed for things he didn't understand. He'd promised himself, silently, fiercely, that in this world he would be different. But the world had its own promises. At the high table, Dumbledore sat again, and for the first time his gaze flicked down to the hat with something like caution. As the feast went on, the candles burned low, and Harry began to notice oddities. A draft that seemed to shift only when people spoke of houses. The banners hanging a fraction too still. The way the doors at the side of the hall, leading to corridors that should have been open. The castle, Harry thought, was listening. And somewhere in its stones a latch had been set. When the feast ended, it did not end in the usual rush of students splitting like a river into 4 streams. No prefects rose to call for their house. No cheers claimed the first years. Instead, McGonagall stood and said, "Follow me," in a voice that brooked no argument. The first years obeyed because there was nothing else to do. They filed out of the great hall beneath the staring eyes of older students. Harry felt them track his movements. He could practically hear their thoughts sliding into place. He kept his chin up, because he had learned that lowering it only invited hands. In the corridor beyond, the air was cooler, stone-scented, threaded with the murmur of portraits that leaned closer as if to taste the scandal. "A hat refusing," hissed a plump witch in a gilt frame. "Never heard the like," muttered a knight whose paint seemed to flake with disapproval. McGonagall's heels clicked, quick and sharp. She didn't look at the portraits. She didn't acknowledge the castle itself. Harry had the impression she was walking not through a school but through a political disaster. They climbed stairs that shifted, as if the castle were reconsidering where it wanted them. Ron stumbled when a step bucked. Hermione grabbed his sleeve without thinking, then pulled her hand back as if embarrassed by the contact. "Where are we going?" a boy asked. Neville Longbottom, Harry remembered, pink-faced and anxious. McGonagall did not slow. "To bed." "But," Neville began. "You will sleep," McGonagall said. "Because whatever nonsense has occurred tonight, you are still children, and you will still attend classes tomorrow." It was the nearest thing to reassurance she offered. They reached a corridor Harry didn't recognize. None of them did. The torches here burned in iron sconces shaped like serpents, though Harry couldn't imagine why. McGonagall stopped before a blank stretch of wall and drew her wand. A door shimmered into existence, its wood dark and glossy, its handle silver. McGonagall's mouth tightened. "This will serve," she said, and opened it. Beyond lay a long room filled with beds, rows and rows, like a hospital ward turned into a dormitory. The beds were old-fashioned four-posters, their curtains in plain dark fabric. Trunks had already been piled at the foot of each, as if some unseen hand had sorted their belongings even if the hat would not sort them. Harry's stomach lurched. "All of us?" Ron whispered. "All of you," McGonagall confirmed. "Boys on the left, girls on the right." A girl with pigtails raised her hand and then seemed to realize what she was doing. "Professor, where are the common rooms?" McGonagall's gaze flicked to the ceiling, as if she could see through it into the sleeping heart of the castle. "Sealed," she said. "For now." Hermione's eyes widened. "Sealed by whom?" McGonagall's look sharpened. "Miss Granger, you will not interrogate me on your first night." Hermione flushed but held her ground. "I'm sorry, Professor. I only meant, if the castle." "The castle," McGonagall said. And the way she said it made Harry feel as though he'd touched something dangerous, "is doing what it believes necessary. As are we." She swept her wand and candle flames sprang into life along the walls. Their light threw long shadows across the beds, turning every four-poster into a small fort of darkness. "Choose a bed," McGonagall ordered. "Do not wander. Do not attempt to leave this room in the night. Do not." Her voice caught, just slightly, as though she had to swallow down something like fear. "Do not attempt heroics." Harry's eyes flicked to the door. It had no visible keyhole. As the students shuffled to claim beds, the room filled with the rustle of sheets, the clunk of trunks, the small, frightened noises of children pretending not to be frightened. Harry chose a bed near Ron. Hermione ended up across the invisible divide, close enough that he could see her face when she looked up. McGonagall watched them settle, shoulders rigid, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. "You are Hogwarts students," she said, softer now. "Remember that." Then she turned and left. The door shut behind her with the finality of a tomb. Harry heard something click. No lock exactly, but the deep, subtle sound of enchantment taking hold. Ron sat on his bed, staring at the door. "This is mad." Hermione's voice carried from the girl's side. "It's unprecedented. That doesn't mean mad." Ron made a noise of disbelief. "Those are the same thing most of the time." Harry unpacked in silence. When he drew his wand from his trunk, it felt absurdly small against the weight of the castle's will. Above them, the candles burned steady, and in the stone beneath the floor, Harry felt the faint vibration of that latch, still set, still waiting. Sleep did not come easily. The room was too full of unfamiliar breathing, too many small noises that might have been harmless and were therefore not. Ron fell asleep in fits, muttering about chess pieces and spiders. Harry lay staring at the canopy above him, the darkness stitched with candlelight. He thought of Privet Drive. He thought of his cupboard. He thought of the way he had once imagined Hogwarts as a place that would explain him. Instead, it had made him feel even more like a question. From the girl's side came the soft scrape of pages. Hermione was reading. Of course she was. The candle by her bed had been coaxed smaller, but its light still shone like stubbornness. Harry sat up quietly and slid from his bed. The floor was cold beneath his feet. He padded toward the curtain that divided the room, hesitated at the edge of it like a line drawn in ink. It wasn't enchanted, not really. It was a piece of fabric, but it felt like an accusation. "Hermione," he whispered. Her head snapped up, eyes sharp. "Harry?" He kept his voice low. "Can't sleep." She glanced toward the rows of beds, the shapes of sleeping children. "Neither can I," she whispered back, then hesitated. "You shouldn't be up." He gave a humorless huff. "McGonagall said no heroics. I'm not doing anything. Just..." He didn't know how to finish. Just being awake felt like breaking a rule. Hermione lowered her book slightly. "This is huge," she said, barely audible. "The hat. It's tied to the Founders. If it refuses..." "Does that mean Hogwarts agrees?" Harry asked before he could stop himself. Hermione blinked. What? Harry swallowed. "The hat," said the castle. He stopped. It sounded childish, like talking about a house as if it were a person. And yet he had seen stairs move on a whim. He had watched doors appear. He had been told, bluntly, that common rooms were sealed. It said it was listening. Hermione's eyes flicked to the walls, to the ceiling, to the sealed door. "Hogwarts is full of enchantments," she whispered. "Some of them react, like portraits, like the stairs, but agreeing, that's magic," Ron mumbled suddenly, half asleep. "Bloody magic. Can't even let you eat in peace." Harry froze. Ron rolled over and went silent again. Hermione exhaled softly. "I read," she whispered, "that the school's wards are layered. Some were put up after the Founders. Some are older than the headmaster." Harry sat on the edge of his own bed again, close enough to hear her but far enough to keep the barrier. "So what happens now?" Hermione's expression, caught in candlelight, all sharp angles and earnest terror, was older than 11. "People will try to take advantage," she said. "They will. The houses. Their power. If there's no sorting, the oldest students will reorganize things themselves." Now, Harry's scar prickled, faintly. He rubbed it without thinking. Hermione noticed. "Does it hurt?" He shook his head. "Not really." A quiet stretched between them, filled by the sigh of curtains shifting in a draft that had no business being there. The door at the far end of the dormitory remained shut, featureless, like a stern face. Hermione's voice softened. "You know, it might be a chance to not be stuck." Harry almost laughed. "Stuck where? We're literally stuck." She huffed, almost a smile. "You know what I mean. People expect you to be a certain way based on a table you sit at. If there are no tables, there will still be people," Harry said. Hermione's smile faded. "Yes," she admitted. "There will." From somewhere deep in the castle came a sound like stone settling, low, distant, like the sigh of a sleeping beast. The candle flames flickered. Several students stirred and turned over, but no one woke fully. Harry stared at the door and felt, suddenly, that he was not merely enclosed by walls. He was inside something that had decided to change the rules. And children, he realized, were always the first to be tested by new rules. Morning arrived like a verdict. Someone, an older witch with a ministry badge pinned to her robes, opened the dormitory door without so much as a greeting and herded them into the corridor. McGonagall appeared moments later, crisp as frost, looking as if she had not slept at all. "Single file," she ordered. "No detours. No whispering." Whispering happened anyway, pressed into sleeves and exchanged in glances. Harry heard fragments. "My brother says, my mum will be furious. Maybe they'll send us home. It's you-know-who. It's the headmaster. It's the hat." They moved through the castle in a tight knot, down staircases that seemed to choose their own routes. Twice, corridors that should have led to familiar passages ended in blank walls until McGonagall tapped them sharply with her wand and the walls relented. In the great hall, breakfast waited, laid out in generous piles as if abundance could distract from the fact that something foundational had cracked. The 4 long tables still stood. The house banners still hung, but the air between them felt strained, like stretched cloth. McGonagall led the first years not to one table, but to a new arrangement of benches set at the very front, perpendicular to the others, facing the high table like a tribunal. "Sit," she said. They sat. Harry's hands tightened on his goblet. He could feel older students watching, measuring. At the Slytherin table, Draco leaned back as if comfortable in any chaos, pale fingers tapping a rhythm against the wood. He was speaking to a taller boy with sharp features, an older student judging by his posture, who listened with the patience of someone accustomed to being obeyed. At Gryffindor, several red-haired heads were turned their way. One of them, Percy Weasley, Ron's brother, looked stricken, as if the world had failed to follow the rules he had memorized. Ron hunched lower. "Percy's going to have a fit," he muttered. Hermione's gaze flicked from table to table, cataloging alliances she didn't yet understand. "Look," she whispered, and nodded toward the teachers. Dumbledore sat centered, calm and bright-eyed. Snape's face was a storm held in place by pride. Flitwick's feet barely reached the floor. He looked delighted in a way that worried Harry. Sprout looked like someone anticipating a frost. Beside them, a stranger sat, robes neat, hair pinned, a ministry badge catching candlelight. She looked out over the hall like a banker assessing a debt. Dumbledore rose. "Good morning," he said, and the words were absurdly ordinary. No one answered. Dumbledore smiled anyway. "As you have discovered, Hogwarts has elected to begin this year with an adjustment." A ripple of laughter, quickly strangled. "The Ministry," Dumbledore continued, inclining his head toward the woman, "has kindly sent Madame Umbridge as an observer." The name meant nothing to Harry, but the way several older students stiffened made his skin crawl. Umbridge smiled with too many teeth. "Such a pleasure," she said, voice syrupy, "to witness Hogwarts history." Snape's mouth tightened as if he had swallowed something bitter. Dumbledore's gaze returned to the students. "Classes will proceed as usual. Meals will proceed as usual. The only alteration is where you sleep and where you gather in your free time." A hand shot up at Ravenclaw. "Headmaster, where will we gather?" Dumbledore's eyes twinkled faintly, but his voice was careful. "We will for the moment gather as years." Murmurs. At the first year's bench, Hermione leaned forward like a hawk. Harry felt Ron's knee bouncing beside him. "And the house points?" someone called. Dumbledore's smile did not waver. "There will be no house points this year." The hall erupted. Voices rose, angry and confused. Older students stood, banging hands on the table. Someone shouted that it was unfair. Someone else shouted that it was brilliant. Harry caught Draco's laugh again, bright as broken glass. Dumbledore raised his hands. The sound did not vanish. He did not silence them with magic. He simply waited, patient as stone. Gradually, reluctantly, the noise ebbed. "When a tradition is removed," Dumbledore said, "we discover what we were using it to hold in place. I ask you, ask all of you, to be mindful." "No." Umbridge's smile did not change, but her eyes glittered with interest. McGonagall's posture tightened. She looked as though she wanted to argue in front of the entire hall, and was restraining herself by force. Dumbledore finished softly. "Hogwarts remains Hogwarts. You remain its students. That is enough, for now." Harry wasn't sure it was. By the time they reached their first class, Harry understood one thing. Without houses, The castle was rearranging people like pieces on a board. Charms should have been safe. It should have been Professor Flitwick squeaking about wand movements, feathers floating, laughter at the first time someone made a quill twitch. All of that happened, but underneath it ran a sharper current. The desks were arranged not by house but by name, by year, by something that felt oddly deliberate. Harry found himself seated with Ron on one side, and a girl called Susan Bones on the other. Hermione was 2 rows ahead with Neville, practically vibrating with the effort of not answering every question before it was asked. Flitwick bounced atop a stack of books, eyes shining. "Wonderful, wonderful," he piped, clapping his hands. "A little change keeps the mind awake, doesn't it? Now, levitation, swish and flick." The class laughed nervously. Harry tried the movement. His feather trembled, then lifted a centimeter before dropping like a stone. Ron's feather rolled off the desk. Hermione's feather rose as if pulled by a string, smooth and steady. Flitwick applauded. "Excellent, Miss Granger. 10. He stopped. His hands hovered. "Ah, old habits. Very good, Miss Granger." Hermione's face fell for a fraction of a second. Then she made herself smile. But Harry saw the small wound. Even Hermione, who claimed not to care about houses, had wanted the points. She'd wanted proof. As they practiced, Harry sensed eyes on them from the back of the room. Older students, 3rd years perhaps, standing with arms crossed, observing like guards. One of them, a thin boy with a sharp chin, whispered something to a friend and nodded toward Hermione's raised feather. When class ended, the first years poured into the corridor like released water. Harry tightened his grip on his bag. "We're going to get lost," Ron said, staring at the moving staircases with an expression of betrayal. "We're definitely going to get lost." Hermione's voice cut through. "No, we're going to keep track." Ron blinked. "How?" Hermione held up a scrap of parchment covered in tiny writing. "I've mapped the route so far." Ron looked personally offended. "You mapped it?" "It's just logic," Hermione said, as if the castle's shifting corridors were a simple puzzle. "The stairs move in a pattern. There are repeats. You can predict it if you pay attention." Harry watched her, a strange admiration twisting with unease. He'd thought Hogwarts might be a place where he could stop being odd. Hermione seemed determined to become odder on purpose. They turned a corner and nearly collided with Draco. He was with 2 thick-set boys and a pale girl with a pointed face who looked at Harry as if he were a stain. Draco's smile widened. "Well," Draco said softly. "Look what the castle coughed up." Ron bristled. "Get out of the way." Draco's eyes slid over Ron's robes, over the frayed cuff. "You don't have a way anymore, do you?" he murmured. "No house, no table, just floating." Hermione stepped forward. "We're going to class." Draco's gaze sharpened. "Oh, of course you are," he said, and there was a kind of cruelty in how he looked at her raised chin. "Little Miss Perfect, tell me, who will clap for you now?" Hermione's mouth opened. Harry saw the retort gathering like a spell. Before she could speak, the torches along the corridor flickered. The air thickened, heavy as damp wool. Draco's smirk faltered. The stone beneath their feet vibrated, faint but undeniable. A suit of armor at the corner turned its helmet, slowly, toward them. No one moved. Then the armor's gauntlet lifted, pointing down the corridor, away from Draco, away from Harry, directing them like a silent command. Draco's face went pale. Ron swallowed. Did it just? Hermione's eyes were wide, breath quick. "Hogwarts," she whispered, reverent and afraid. Harry felt the latch again, deep in the walls, as if the castle itself had decided, not here, not now. Draco backed away first, pride barely holding his spine straight. "Come on," he snapped at his friends, voice too sharp. They retreated. Harry, Ron, and Hermione walked on without speaking until the armor was far behind, and the torches burned normal again. Ron finally exhaled. "I don't like this year." Harry didn't either. And that was the problem. Transfiguration was worse. Not because the magic was harder, though it was, but because McGonagall carried the Sorting Hat's refusal like a personal insult. She swept into the classroom, robes snapping, and the room fell silent as if she'd cast it. "Transfiguration," she said, "is some of the most complex and dangerous magic you will learn at Hogwarts. Anyone messing about in my class will leave and will not return." Her gaze slid across them, pausing just long enough on Harry that his spine stiffened, then moved on. She began with theory, laws and limits, the necessity of intent, and then demonstrated by turning her desk into a pig and back again with a flick so precise it made Hermione's fingers twitch in envy. As McGonagall spoke, Harry watched her more than the board. There was tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her eyes. She was a woman used to rules. The castle had taken one of her oldest rules and snapped it in half. When she assigned them the task of turning a matchstick into a needle, the room filled with the scratch of wands and muttered incantations. Harry's matchstick remained stubbornly wooden. Ron's matchstick smoked and singed the desk. Hermione's matchstick thinned, gleamed, and became something that might have pierced skin. McGonagall inspected the results with brisk efficiency. She nodded at Hermione's needle. "Adequate," she said. Hermione's face fell, just a fraction. Harry felt anger bloom on her behalf. Adequate. For Hermione, it might as well have been an insult. McGonagall moved on without warmth. When she reached Harry's desk, she looked down at his matchstick, still a matchstick. Her eyes flicked up to his scar. Her mouth tightened. "Mr. Potter," she said quietly, "your mind is elsewhere." Harry's cheeks burned. "I'm trying, Professor." "I do not doubt that," McGonagall said, and the words sounded like a truth and a warning. "But trying is not sufficient in Transfiguration." She moved away. Ron leaned toward Harry, whispering through clenched teeth. "She hates you." "She doesn't," Hermione whispered from ahead without turning. "She's stressed." Ron made a rude noise. Harry stared at his matchstick and tried to focus. He thought of a needle. Sharp, cold, useful. He pictured the matchstick thinning, changing, becoming. He flicked his wand. For a moment the wood shimmered, as if considering. Then it snapped back into itself, stubborn. Harry exhaled, frustrated. At the back of the room, that same older student Harry had seen in Charms stood in the doorway, half hidden, watching. McGonagall's gaze found him and held hard. The older student vanished like a shadow. McGonagall's wand tapped her desk. "Enough," she said. "Homework. Read chapters 1 through 3. Memorize the 5 principal exceptions to Gamp's law of elemental transfiguration." Groans. Immediate. McGonagall's eyes swept the room, and for the first time her voice softened. Not in kindness, but in something like grim honesty. "This year," she said, "we'll test you. You are not accustomed to uncertainty. Neither are we." She paused and added, as if she resented the necessity of saying it, "Hogwarts will not tolerate cruelty. Not from students. Not from staff. Not from—" She stopped, jaw working, and finished. "From anyone." Harry felt the weight behind the words, the knowledge of political eyes. He thought of Umbridge's smile. He thought of the armor pointing. When the bell rang, the students surged out. Harry lingered just long enough to see McGonagall grip the edge of her desk with one hand, fingers tight, as if she were holding the room in place. And in the stone beneath their feet, the latch held. By lunchtime, the castle had started to split, not by houses, but by hunger. Students gathered in clusters along corridors and stair landings, whispering like conspirators. You could tell who belonged together by the way they stood, shoulders angled inward, backs turned to the rest of the world, voices low. Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat at the first year's bench again, eating bread that tasted of flour and unease. The older tables buzzed. The absence of house points had removed a game, and the students were making a new one. "Look," Hermione whispered. Harry followed her gaze. Draco stood near the Slytherin table, speaking to the thin older student, sharp chin, clever eyes. Draco's posture was casual, but his hands were tight. The older boy listened, then nodded slowly, as if granting permission. A group of Ravenclaws nearby had formed a circle, talking rapidly, quills out. A few Hufflepuffs sat together, shoulders hunched, faces tense with worry. Gryffindors, if they could be called that without houses, looked torn between indignation and excitement. Ron's mouth tightened. "They're already sorting themselves." Hermione's eyes flashed. "Not properly." "What's properly?" Ron snapped. "It's people, Hermione. People will pick sides." Hermione's jaw clenched. "Then we should make sure the sides aren't." She stopped, because the thought was too large. Too heavy for lunch. Harry's scar prickled again faintly. He rubbed it, then realized he was doing it, and stopped. He didn't want to be watched, but he was watched. Not only by Draco, not only by curious older students, by something else too, by the castle, by magic, by whatever had decided to pull one of Hogwarts' oldest levers. After lunch, they attempted to find the library. Hermione led, parchment map in hand, brow furrowed. The stairs shifted twice beneath them. A corridor that should have taken them past a tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy instead opened into a stretch of hall lined with suits of armor. Each suit held a weapon. Ron swallowed. "Maybe we should take a different way." Hermione, stubborn, stepped forward. The armor nearest them moved. Not like a person, not fully, just a tilt of its helmet, a subtle shift of its weight. But the effect was immediate. Every hair on Harry's arm stood up. Hermione halted. The armor raised its sword, not in threat, but in a slow, deliberate gesture, pointing down the corridor behind them. Ron's voice came out as a squeak. "It's telling us no." Hermione stared, breathing fast. "Why?" Harry's mind flashed back to Draco, to the older boy nodding. "Because someone's using that corridor," he said quietly. Hermione's face tightened. "We're being directed." "Like sheep," Ron muttered. The armor did not move again. It simply held its sword, patient and immovable. Hermione swallowed her pride and turned away. As they walked back the way they'd come, Harry's scar prickled once more, sharper, as if something in the castle had grown displeased with more than just corridors. They found the library by accident, through a door that hadn't been there a moment earlier. Hermione gasped in delight. Ron groaned. Harry stepped inside and felt the air change. Dust, ink, old paper, knowledge like a weight. Madame Pince glared at them as if they had personally offended every book. Hermione moved toward the shelves as if answering a call. Harry lingered near the entrance, watching. Students in older years sat together in clusters, heads bent close. Even here, factions were forming. He realized with a chill that without houses the castle wasn't making everyone equal. It was removing the school's official boundaries. And unofficial boundaries were always sharper. Hermione found a book before Harry could blink. She tugged it from the shelf like she'd known exactly where it would be, then piled another on top of it. Ron stared at her hands as if they were performing a crime. "You can't possibly read all that," he hissed. "I can skim," Hermione whispered back, offended. Harry leaned in. The first book's title was so old, the letters had cracked. A History of Hogwarts Wards and Foundational Enchantments. Hermione flipped it open, eyes scanning at speed. Ron slumped into a chair. "I hate books." Hermione ignored him. "Listen," she whispered after a minute, tapping a paragraph. "The Sorting Hat enchantment is listed as a derivative of a Founder's Compact, an agreement woven into the school's wardstone." Harry's stomach tightened. "Wardstone?" Hermione nodded, eyes bright. "It's mentioned in a footnote. A physical anchor for the oldest protective spells. It says the compact can reassert itself under fracture conditions." Ron blinked. "Fracture conditions? That sounds cheerful. Hermione kept reading, lips moving silently. Harry looked around again. The library felt like a city of paper, and like any city, it had neighborhoods. In one corner, two older students argued in whispers, faces taut. In another, a cluster laughed too softly, shoulders too close. At a long table near the windows, Draco sat with the sharp-chinned older boy and a few others, their heads bent in a tight knot. Draco glanced up and caught Harry looking. His smile returned, slow and satisfied. Harry's scar prickled. He forced himself to look away. "We should go," he murmured. Hermione barely heard. "It mentions that the hat's enchantment is bound to the Founder's stated purpose." Ron yawned. "Which was?" Hermione glanced between them, voice dropping. "To protect the school by dividing it. But not permanently, it says." She read, then swallowed. "It says the division was meant to be removed when it became more harmful than helpful." Harry felt cold creep into his bones. "So the hat thinks it's harmful now." Hermione nodded slowly. "And if it's tied to the wardstone?" Ron sat up. "Then it's not just a hat having a tantrum." "No," Hermione whispered. "It's the school." A silence settled over them, thick as dust. From the far end of the library came a small commotion, books sliding, chairs scraping. Madame Pince hissed furiously, marching toward a group of giggling second years. The noise drew attention, and in that moment Draco's table rose as one, smoothly, like a practiced unit. The sharp-chinned older boy murmured something. Draco's eyes flashed. Their group moved out, not hurried, not obvious, but with purpose. Harry's scar stung, sudden and sharp enough to make his eyes water. He flinched, pressing his fingers to his forehead. Hermione gasped. "Harry!" Ron leaned in, alarmed. "What is it?" Harry forced himself to breathe, blinking hard. The pain faded as quickly as it had come, leaving a throb like a bruise. "I don't know," he whispered. But somewhere deep inside him, a memory he didn't own stirred. Cold laughter, green light, the sense of being hunted. And that, at 11, was not a thing he wanted to feel. Hermione snapped her book shut. "We're going," she said, voice suddenly firm. Ron didn't argue. They gathered their things quickly, moving toward the door. Harry glanced back once and saw Draco's empty chair. The library, for all its books, could not tell him what Draco planned. But the castle might. As they stepped into the corridor, the torches dimmed for a heartbeat, then flared again, as if the school were taking a breath. They didn't make it far before the castle made itself heard. Not with words. Hogwarts didn't need words. It spoke in shut doors, in shifting staircases, in the way air thickened when you approached somewhere you weren't meant to be. Hermione led them toward what her map insisted would be the fastest route back to the first year's dormitory. The corridor ahead narrowed, torches spaced farther apart. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and something older, metallic. Ron's voice was tight. "I don't like this way." Hermione hesitated, glancing at her parchment. It should be fine." They took 3 more steps. A tapestry ahead, one Harry hadn't noticed a moment ago, trembled. Its woven scene showed a wizard being chased by a horde of angry goblins. As Harry watched, the goblins' stitched eyes turned toward him. Then the tapestry slid aside like a curtain, revealing a passage behind it. Hermione sucked in a breath. That wasn't there. From the passage came voices. Older. Male.u. Controlled. Harry caught a name. Malfoy. And then a low laugh that could only belong to Draco. Ron's ears went red. What's he doing? Hermione's fingers tightened on her wand. Eavesdropping is against... A thrum went through the stone beneath their feet. Deep and unmistakable. The torches flared brighter, then dimmed. The tapestry twitched, as if warning them. Harry's scar tingled, not pain now, but pressure, like a finger pressing against old skin. He whispered, "We should go." Hermione's jaw worked. She wanted to know. She wanted the answer more than she wanted safety. But the castle's warning was not subtle. She backed away, pulling the tapestry closed as if it were a door to a storm. They hurried down a side corridor, steps quick. Behind them, the torches returned to steady flame. Ron glanced over his shoulder. How did the tapestry? The castle, Hermione whispered, breathless. It showed us, then told us not to look. Harry's mouth felt dry. Why show us at all? Hermione didn't answer. Her eyes were bright with fear and fascination. They reached a staircase. It shifted beneath them, slowly, deliberately, turning away from the direction they'd intended. Ron swore softly. Hermione gripped the banister. It's diverting us. From Draco, Harry said. They were shepherded upward, through a corridor lined with portraits of sleeping witches. One portrait opened a bleary eye as they passed and muttered, "Trouble," before rolling over. They turned a corner and nearly collided with Snape. He loomed out of the shadows like he'd been poured from them. Black robes falling straight, eyes reflecting torchlight like wet stone. Harry's stomach lurched. He had never met the man properly, not in any context that wasn't a hall of hundreds. Here, in a narrow corridor, Snape felt like a trap. Snape's gaze landed on Harry's face. It lingered on the scar. Something flickered there. Recognition, perhaps, or something colder. Out of bed already? Snape drawled. Hermione's spine went rigid. "Professor, it's not—" "Silence," Snape said, not loudly, but with enough bite that Hermione's mouth snapped shut. He looked at Ron, lips curling. "Weasley." Ron bristled. "Professor." Snape's eyes returned to Harry. "Potter," he said, and the name sounded like he was tasting something unpleasant. "Walking with friends? How charming." Harry forced himself to meet Snape's gaze. "We're going back to our dormitory." Snape's mouth tightened. "See that you do? This castle is unsettled. Students wandering might find themselves where they should not be." His eyes narrowed. "Or in company they should not keep." Hermione's cheeks flushed. "We went?" Snape lifted a hand, cutting her off. "I did not ask." He stepped aside, sweeping his robe like a curtain. "Go, too." They hurried past, but Harry felt Snape's gaze on his back like a weight. When they were far enough away, Ron hissed, "He hates you. I told you." Hermione whispered, "He's suspicious. He thinks." Harry's scar prickled again, faintly, and he wondered, briefly, sickly, if the castle was diverting them not only from Draco but from Snape too. As they reached their dormitory door, it swung open before they touched it. Warm candlelight spilled out, welcoming and wrong. Hermione stared at the doorway. "It knows us," she whispered. Ron swallowed. "I don't want it to." Harry stepped inside anyway, because where else was there to go? Behind them, the door shut with a soft click. A latch. That evening, the dormitory no longer felt like a place to sleep. It felt like a camp. Students clustered on beds and trunks, whispering in tight circles. Some looked excited, as if the hat's refusal had turned school into an adventure. Others looked pale, eyes darting to the door as if expecting someone to burst in and announce they were being sent home. A girl, called Lavender Brown, was crying quietly. Her friend patted her shoulder, murmuring that her mother would sort it out. Her father would write a letter. The ministry would never allow. Hermione moved through the room with purpose, as if motion could hold panic at bay. She found a corner, spread her parchment map on a trunk, and began annotating it with fresh observations. Ron dropped onto his bed. This is going to be the worst year in history. Harry sat beside him. The mattress dipped. Maybe it'll go back, he said, though he didn't believe it. Hermione's quill scratched. It won't, she said without looking up. Not quickly. Ron made a strangled sound. How do you know that? Hermione glanced up, eyes bright. Because the hat didn't say not tonight. It said not this year. And because the common rooms are sealed. That's not something the staff did. That's something the castle did. Maybe Dumbledore did it, Ron offered weakly. Hermione shook her head. The headmaster can't seal 4 common rooms simultaneously against their own passwords, not without enormous backlash in the wards. And if he did, McGonagall wouldn't look like she'd swallowed a live bat. Harry almost smiled at that, then remembered Snape and decided not to. A knock sounded at the door. Every head snapped up. The door opened, and Dumbledore stepped inside. He looked, suddenly, less like a storybook wizard, and more like a man walking into a room full of frightened children who wanted answers. Behind him came McGonagall, stiff as ever, and Professor Sprout, whose face held a gentleness that made several students straighten as if hoping for comfort. Dumbledore smiled. "Good evening." No one answered, but the silence wasn't defiant. It was desperate. Dumbledore's eyes swept the room, landing on faces. Hannah's tear-streaked cheeks, Neville's trembling hands, Hermione's fiercely attentive stare, Ron's guarded scowl. His gaze paused on Harry, and Harry felt inexplicably seen. "I will not keep you long," Dumbledore said. "I know you are tired. I know you are unsettled. I know you have questions." A few students nodded vigorously. Dumbledore held up a hand. "I cannot answer all of them tonight. Some answers must be earned with time." "Nah," Ron muttered. "Brilliant." McGonagall shot him a look that could have frozen water. Dumbledore's smile softened. "However," he continued, "I can promise you this, you are safe. Hogwarts may feel strange. It may feel different. But Hogwarts was built to protect you." Hermione's hand shot up despite herself. Dumbledore's eyes crinkled. "Yes, Miss Granger." Hermione stood, chin high. "Headmaster, what does the Sorting Hat mean by fracture conditions?" A hush. McGonagall's fingers tightened. Dumbledore studied Hermione for a moment. Then he said, carefully, "It means the school's census division that has become dangerous." Hermione's voice trembled with the effort of staying calm. "Dangerous how?" Dumbledore's gaze flicked to McGonagall, then back. "In ways I would rather prevent than describe." A boy shouted, "Is the hat possessed?" Sprout flinched at the word. Dumbledore shook his head. "No," Ron blurted. "Can it be made to do it anyway?" McGonagall's mouth tightened. Dumbledore's eyes went serious. "No," he said, and the simple firmness chilled the room. Hermione's voice came again, smaller now. "So what do we do?" Dumbledore's smile returned, gentle and sharp all at once. "You do what witches and wizards have always done when confronted with change," he said. "You choose who you will be." Harry's stomach twisted. Choose. He had been told he was special by strangers. He had been shaped by fear and neglect. He had never chosen anything that mattered. Dumbledore's gaze held the room. "You will have no house to hide behind this year," he said quietly. "No banner to excuse cruelty. No point system to reward performative bravery. You will have yourselves, your choices, and your community." "No." Ron scowled. "That sounds like a lecture." "It is," Dumbledore said cheerfully. A few students laughed, small and shaky. Dumbledore stepped back toward the door. "Sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will be busy. And remember, Hogwarts listens. Speak kindly in its walls." With that, he and the professors left. The door shut. The room remained still for a heartbeat, as if everyone needed time to accept that the answer was, essentially, good luck. Ron flopped back on his bed. "We're doomed." Hermione sat slowly, eyes fixed on the door. "He's right about one thing," she whispered. Harry glanced at her. She swallowed. "We don't get to hide behind a table anymore." Harry stared at his hands and felt the weight of that. Somewhere, deep in the castle, something old shifted in its sleep. Harry did not see what happened after Dumbledore left the dormitory. But the castle was full of whispering walls, and walls had ways of making stories travel. Later, when the first years finally slept, the Great Hall remained lit by a handful of candles, their flames steady and small. The tables were cleared. The banners hung heavy in darkness. The ceiling showed a sky that looked too real to be comfort. Dumbledore sat alone at the high table with the sorting hat placed before him, as if it were a patient awaiting diagnosis. McGonagall stood a few paces away, hands clasped, posture rigid enough to crack. Snape lingered in shadow, silent. Dumbledore rested his fingertips lightly on the table, not touching the hat. "Old friend," he murmured. The hat's brim did not move. McGonagall's voice was tight. "It cannot be allowed." Dumbledore's gaze remained thoughtful. "Allowed," he repeated softly, as if tasting the word. McGonagall's eyes flashed. "You know what I mean." Snape's voice slipped from the shadows. "The Ministry will not tolerate disorder." Dumbledore's eyes flicked towards Snape. "The Ministry," he said gently, "has tolerated many things it should not." Snape's jaw tightened, but he did not respond. McGonagall took a step forward. "We can override it," she said, and the desperation in her voice was new. "There must be a counterspell. A Founder's binding can be rewritten." Dumbledore's expression saddened. "Can it?" he asked softly. The hat's brim twitched as if stirred by the sound of its own importance. A seam split slightly. A breath seemed to pass through the cloth. "Rewrite," it said, voice low. "Break, Tyke." McGonagall stiffened. "Hat." "I was made," the hat said, "to preserve what they built, not what you have made of it." Snape's eyes narrowed. "You speak as if you have judgment." "I have memory," the hat replied, "and I have mandate." McGonagall's voice sharpened. "Children need stability. They need guidance," the hat answered. "Not banners sharpened into weapons." Dumbledore spoke quietly. "What do you want, Hat?" The hat's voice echoed faintly in the empty hall. "I want Hogwarts to stop teaching children to belong to factions before they belong to themselves." McGonagall's hands clenched. "This is idealism." "It is survival," the hat said, and the word dropped like stone. Snape stepped forward into the candlelight, face pale. "And what of Slytherin?" he asked softly, and there was something dangerous in the calm. "What of the children who require a certain discipline?" The hat's brim curled. "They will require it whether or not you feed it with legacy." Snape's eyes glittered. "Do not presume to lecture me on legacy." The hat's voice sharpened. "Legacy is the problem." McGonagall inhaled, as if bracing herself. "If you refuse," she said, voice trembling with controlled fury, "you place us in political jeopardy. The Ministry will intervene." Dumbledore's eyes went distant, thoughtful. "Perhaps it already intends to." The hat was silent for a moment. Then it spoke, and the words were not for them alone. "Hogwarts has been tested before," it said. "It will be tested again. This time, it will test itself." McGonagall's voice cracked. "By using children," the hat answered, softer now, as if the softness were older than guilt. "By watching who the children choose to become when no one chooses for them." Dumbledore's gaze lowered to the cloth, and for the first time he looked tired. "Very well," he whispered. "Then we proceed." In the shadows, Snape's face tightened, and something cold moved behind his eyes. The castle's candles flickered as if a draft had passed through the heart of the school. And somewhere far above, in the first year's dormitory, Harry slept with his scar throbbing faintly, dreaming of green light and a laughter he could not name. Potions was the first time Harry understood that lack of houses did not mean lack of favoritism. The dungeon smelled of damp stone and bitter herbs. Cauldrons steamed like swamp breath. The torches burned greenish, throwing sickly light over faces already tense. Snape glided to the front, black robes trailing like spilled ink. His eyes swept the room and landed on Harry with the precision of a drawn blade. "Sit," he said. They sat. Snape's gaze moved. It lingered on Draco, who sat straighter, pale chin lifted, as if he had already been chosen by something older than the hat. Snape's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything Harry trusted. "You are here," Snape said softly, "to learn the subtle science and exact art of potion-making." His voice was velvet over iron. The class fell silent. "As there are no houses this year," Snape continued, eyes narrowing slightly, "you will be tempted to believe there are no reputations." His gaze flicked to a few students, and Harry saw several flinch. "You will be mistaken." He began listing ingredients, writing in a sharp hand. As he spoke, Harry felt the weight of every word. Snape wasn't merely teaching. He was establishing territory. "Potter," Snape said suddenly. Harry's stomach clenched. "Yes, Professor?" Snape turned, expression smooth. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry's mind went blank. He'd read the books, yes, but the words scattered. He swallowed. "I don't know, sir." Snape's lip curled. "Barely." "Pity," he said. "Fame isn't everything." A few students laughed nervously. Hermione's hand shot up. Snape ignored it. "Let us try again. Potter, where would you look if I told you to find a bezoar?" Harry's cheeks burned. "I don't know, sir." Snape's eyes glittered. "Thought you wouldn't." His voice sharpened, suddenly vicious. "You think it is amusing to arrive at my class unprepared?" "I didn't," Harry began. Silence. Snape's gaze slid to Hermione's raised hand and lingered there, cold. Then he looked away. "You may begin." Instructions on the board. Cauldrons clanged. Ingredients were chopped, measured, stirred. Ron's hand shook slightly. He spilled powdered horn and swore under his breath. Hermione worked with furious precision, jaw clenched. Harry tried to focus. He chopped snake fangs carefully, mind racing. Snape stalked the rows like a predator, pausing to correct with the flick of a wand, the hiss of a comment. When he reached Draco's cauldron, he leaned in, murmured something, and Draco's potion shifted from muddy brown to a cleaner green. When Snape reached Harry, he paused long enough that Harry felt every student in the room lean inward, hungry for humiliation. Snape's voice dropped. "Tell me, Potter," he murmured. "Do you know what the hat said?" Harry's hand stilled. "Yes, Professor." Snape's eyes bored into him. It spoke of fracture, of banners becoming blades. He leaned closer. "Do you know what children become when banners are removed?" Harry's throat tightened. "No, Professor." Snape's mouth curled. "They become honest," he whispered. "And honesty is rarely kind." He straightened and moved on, leaving Harry with fingers numb and a cauldron that suddenly seemed to boil too fast. Across the room, Draco watched, eyes bright. Not amused, interested, like someone watching a door crack open. Harry's scar tingled faintly, and he wondered if Snape's cruelty was personal or strategic. When class ended, Hermione grabbed Harry's sleeve. "He's doing it on purpose," she hissed. Ron scowled. "He's a git." Harry stared after Snape's retreating robes. "Why?" he whispered. Hermione's eyes flicked to Draco, who was leaving with his entourage, moving like someone who already had a faction. "Because," Hermione whispered, voice tight, "some people like the old walls, and if the castle won't give them walls, they'll build their own." By the end of the first week, Hogwarts had begun to look like a court. Not the kind with judges and law, but the kind with alliances and whispers and power traded in glances. Students formed circles in the courtyard and on the steps, murmuring like nobles at a feast. There were no official houses, but there were still names, still families, still reputations older than most of the children wearing them. Harry noticed who walked with whom. He noticed how often Draco was surrounded, not only by other first years, but by older students who seemed to find him amusing or useful. He noticed how quickly some children began to copy him, the tilt of the chin, the lazy disdain. Ron watched too, face tight. "My dad says the Malfoys always stick their fingers in," he muttered. Hermione frowned. "That's not helpful." Ron glared. "It's true." Harry stood between them, feeling the school shift around him like weather. He wasn't sure where he belonged in this new court. He wasn't sure he wanted to belong anywhere. They were sitting on a stone ledge when a shadow fell across them. Harry looked up. It was the sharp-chinned older boy again, the one Draco spoke to. Up close, he looked about 15, lean and pale, eyes too calm. "Potter," the boy said. It wasn't a question. Harry's spine stiffened. "Yes." The boy's gaze flicked to Hermione, then Ron. "Granger, Weasley." He said their names with polite contempt, like tasting cheap wine. Ron bristled. "What do you want?" The boy smiled slightly. "Introductions," he said. "My name is Adrian." Hermione's eyes narrowed. "Adrian what?" Adrian's smile widened. "Just Adrian," he said, as if surnames were privileges. "Some of us are organizing." Ron scoffed. "Organizing what? A club?" "Me. An. Chai." Adrian's gaze slid to Ron. "Cool." "Order," he said quietly. Hermione's breath hitched. "That sounds ominous." Adrian shrugged. "This school has always run on order," he said. "The hat has removed the official structure. Someone must prevent chaos." Harry felt his scar tingle faintly and wondered why. Adrian continued, eyes on Harry. "There will be those who take advantage," he said. "There will be those who use the confusion to settle grudges, to act without consequence." Ron's face went hard. "So you're going to be the consequence?" Adrian's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We will be the safeguard," he said. Hermione's voice was sharp. "Safeguards have rules. Who decides yours?" Adrian tilted his head. "Those with sense," he said. "Those who understand what this place is." Harry's stomach tightened. "And what is it?" Adrian's gaze held his. "A fortress," he said softly. "Not a playground." He nodded once, as if a decision had been made. "You'll hear more," he said, then turned and walked away. Ron stared after him, face pale. "He's nuts." Hermione's fingers clenched around her book. "He's not," she whispered. "He's dangerous." Harry watched Adrian disappear into a knot of older students and felt suddenly very small. Above the courtyard, an owl flew past, wings beating against the gray sky. It carried a letter, someone's mother demanding answers, someone's father promising influence, someone's family reminding them who they were. Harry had no one to write to. And that, in this new court, might have been its own kind of vulnerability. The first year's dormitory became, by necessity, their common room. That meant it also became their arena. Arguments flared over space, over noise, over who stole whose quill. But beneath those petty things ran the deeper conflict. What did it mean to be part of Hogwarts when Hogwarts refused to label you? One evening, after a particularly tense dinner where Draco's laughter had cut through the hall like a blade, Hermione climbed onto a trunk near the center of the room. Her cheeks were flushed, hair frizzed, eyes fierce. "We need rules," she said. A few heads turned. Some groaned. Ron muttered, "Here we go." Hermione ignored him. "Not house rules," she clarified, as if anticipating the objection. "Our own, for us, so no one gets trampled." A boy called Seamus Finnegan snorted. "Who made you boss?" Hermione's gaze snapped to him. "No one," she said sharply. "That's the point. No one is boss. Which means if we don't agree on something, the loudest people will decide for us." Lavender wiped her eyes, listening. Neville nodded nervously. Ron crossed his arms. "So you want a committee?" Hermione glared. "I want people to be safe." A girl scoffed. "We're safe. Dumbledore said so." "None. Nah." Hermione's voice tightened. Dumbledore can't watch every corridor, and the older students are forming groups. You've seen them." A murmur of agreement. Even the skeptics had noticed. Hermione continued, voice rising with urgency. "If we don't look out for each other, we'll be easy targets. And if you think you won't be targeted because you're not important, you're wrong. People like Adrian." Harry's head snapped up. Hermione had said the name out loud. Several students frowned. A few whispered. Ron hissed, "How do you know his name?" Hermione's eyes flicked to Harry, then back. "Because he introduced himself," she said. "And because he's recruiting." Seamus laughed uneasily. "Recruiting what?" Hermione swallowed. "Control," she said. A silence fell. Harry felt the latch in the walls hum faintly, as if the castle approved of the conversation, or at least listened. Hermione's voice softened, pleading. "We should stick together," she said. "If someone tries to bully, if someone tries to isolate, if someone tries to—" "Like Malfoy," Ron muttered. Hermione nodded. "Yes. Like him." "Nah." The room shifted. Some students nodded with relief. Others looked scared. A few looked thoughtful in a way Harry didn't like, calculating. Harry stepped forward, surprising himself. "Hermione's right," he said, and his voice carried farther than he expected. Heads turned to him. Harry felt heat rush to his face. He hated being watched, and yet here he was, stepping into it. "We don't have houses," Harry continued, forcing himself not to shrink. "So we have to decide what we do instead. If we do nothing, someone else will decide." Ron stared at him, conflicted. Hermione's eyes shone with gratitude, fierce and bright. Seamus scratched his head. "So what, then? We all walk around in a herd?" Hermione exhaled. "We set basic rules," she said quickly. "No one goes anywhere alone at night. If someone's being picked on, we intervene. If we hear about older students trying to recruit, we tell a professor." A boy scoffed. "Snitching." Hermione's eyes flashed. "Surviving." Harry felt something settle in the room. Not agreement, not fully, but awareness. The first years were learning, rapidly, that adulthood could arrive early when structure collapsed. Ron finally uncrossed his arms. He sighed. "Fine," he muttered. "No one goes alone." Hermione's shoulders loosened, just slightly. Harry looked around at the faces. Children, still, but children living in a castle that had decided to test them. For a moment, he wondered if the hat had refused to sort because it believed children could be better than the systems built around them. Then he remembered Draco's smile, and he wasn't sure. They broke Hermione's new rule the very next night. Not because they wanted to, because curiosity and fear are cousins, and Hogwarts had made both of them loud. Hermione had been restless all evening, eyes darting to the door, to the corridor beyond. Ron pretended not to notice, sulking on his bed, but his foot bounced. Harry lay awake, scar tingling faintly as if anticipating trouble. When Hermione whispered, "They're meeting again," it felt like the castle itself had spoken. Ron sat up. "How do you know?" Hermione's eyes were bright in candlelight. "Because the corridor near the tapestry is being avoided," she said. "And because the armor is directing people away. It did it again today." Harry's stomach tightened. "So the castle knows." Hermione nodded. "And it's showing us. Just enough." Ron groaned softly. "This is a terrible idea." Harry knew it was. He also knew that lying in bed pretending nothing was happening would feel worse. They dressed quickly, pulling on robes, shoes. Harry's wand felt solid in his hand. He didn't know much magic yet, but holding it made him feel less helpless. They slipped out as quietly as they could. The dormitory door opened with a soft sigh, as if it had been waiting. Harry didn't like that. The corridor was dim, torches low. Their footsteps sounded too loud on stone. Hermione led, breath shallow. Ron followed, muttering insults under his breath as if they were protection. Harry brought up the rear, eyes scanning shadows. They reached the tapestry, the one with the goblins chasing the wizard. It hung still, but Harry swore the goblin's stitched eyes glinted in the torchlight. Hermione reached out carefully and brushed the edge of the fabric. The tapestry twitched. Then, slowly, it slid aside. Ron swore silently, eyes wide. Beyond was the passage. Warm light flickered from within. Voices murmured. Low, controlled, older than theirs. Hermione stepped forward, but Harry grabbed her sleeve. She looked back, irritated. "We shouldn't go in," Harry whispered. Hermione's eyes flashed. "We can listen." Ron swallowed. "We can die," he whispered. Hermione rolled her eyes, but her hand shook slightly on her wand. They moved closer, pressing into the shadow beside the opening. Harry held his breath. A voice spoke. Adrian's, calm and measured. "The staff will pretend it's temporary. They will claim the hat will relent. It will not." Another voice answered, older still, perhaps 6th year. "And the headmaster?" Adrian's tone held contempt. "The headmaster plays games," he said. "He believes chaos will teach virtue. We cannot permit chaos." Harry's scar tingled again, sharper. Adrian continued, "We will create structure. We will offer protection. We will offer belonging." A low chuckle from someone. "Sounds like a house." Adrian's response was smooth. "Houses were crude," he said. "They divided by traits children barely understand. We will divide by loyalty." Hermione's breath caught. Ron's eyes widened. He mouthed, "Told you." Adrian's voice lowered, intimate. "The first years are frightened. They will cling to whoever feels strong. We will be strong." Harry's stomach churned. There was something in Adrian's words that felt like baited hooks. A third voice spoke, Draco's, unmistakably. "And Potter?" he drawled. "He's a symbol. People will follow him if we let them." Adrian hummed. "Potter is a child," he said, "and children are easily directed." Harry's hand tightened on his wand so hard his fingers ached. Draco's voice sharpened. "He's not just a child." Adrian's tone stayed calm. "Everything bleeds," he said softly. Hermione flinched. Ron's face went pale. Harry's scar burned, sudden and fierce, pain blooming like fire behind his eyes. He bit back a sound, breath shaking. Hermione grabbed his arm, alarmed. Ron's hand hovered, useless. Inside the passage, a voice paused. "Did you hear?" Harry's vision blurred. He forced himself to breathe, to swallow pain, to stay silent. The tapestry shifted suddenly, without Hermione touching it. It began sliding back into place. Hermione's eyes widened. "It's closing." Ron hissed, "Run!" They stumbled backward as the tapestry fell, hiding the passage entirely. The goblins' stitched faces looked almost smug. Footsteps sounded behind the fabric, approaching. Harry didn't wait to see. They fled down the corridor, torches blurring, breath tearing at their throats. Behind them, the tapestry stayed closed, and Harry's scar burned like a warning that had finally found its voice. They ran until their lungs felt like torn cloth. The stairs shifted beneath them as they took them two at a time. Twice, corridors angled away in ways Hermione's map hadn't predicted. Once, a door that should have led to a shortcut opened onto a blank wall, forcing them to double back. Harry's scar pulsed with pain, sharp and rhythmic, like a heartbeat that wasn't his. He pressed his fingers to it, trying to hold himself together. Green flashes danced at the edge of his vision. Laughter, cold, distant, echoed in his skull. "Harry!" Hermione whispered urgently. "Harry, look at me." He tried. Her face swam. Ron grabbed Harry's elbow, hauling him along. "Come on, come on." Behind them, footsteps echoed, too heavy to be theirs, too purposeful. They rounded a corner and nearly slammed into a suit of armor. It moved. The armor stepped forward, blocking the corridor. Hermione skidded to a stop, breath ragged. "No!" she gasped. "Not now." The armor lifted its gauntlet, not pointing away this time, but pointing to a narrow archway to their left that Harry hadn't noticed. A passage, dark and thin. Ron stared. "It's helping." Hermione didn't hesitate. She darted into the passage. Ron pulled Harry after her, half dragging him. The darkness swallowed them. Behind, the armor turned, and Harry heard metal scrape against stone. A clash, steel on steel, rang out, sharp and startling. Someone shouted, muffled. Hermione ran ahead, wand raised. "Lumos," she whispered, and a small light flared at the tip. The passage twisted, low ceiling pressing close. Harry's shoulder brushed stone, cold and damp. Ron's breath came in harsh gasps. "Where are we?" Hermione didn't answer. She didn't know. The passage ended abruptly in a small chamber with a single door. It was old, wood swollen with age, iron bands rusted. Hermione grabbed the handle and yanked. It opened. They spilled through into a deserted classroom, dusty, abandoned, desks piled in a corner. Hermione slammed the door shut behind them, pressing her back to it. Harry staggered, clutching his head. The pain was fading, leaving a throb and a sick emptiness. Ron leaned over him, face white. "What was that? What did they mean? Everything bleeds." Hermione's eyes were huge. "They're forming something," she whispered. "A faction. House, but worse." Harry swallowed bile. "They mentioned me," he rasped. Hermione's gaze snapped to him. "Your scar, Harriet." "I'm fine," he lied. Ron's voice shook with anger. "They're talking about you like you're a prize." Harry stared at his hands, trembling. A prize? A symbol. A child easily directed. Outside the door came the faint sound of footsteps, then silence. Hermione held her breath. A low thrum vibrated through the floor. Gentle but undeniable. The air thickened, like a spell settling. The footsteps outside retreated. Hermione exhaled shakily. "The castle," she whispered. Ron stared at the door. "It's hiding us." Harry's skin prickled. He didn't know if that was comforting or terrifying. Hermione whispered, almost reverent. "It closed the tapestry. It moved the stairs. It opened a passage. It's choosing," Harry said quietly. Hermione looked at him. Harry swallowed. "It's choosing where we go," he said. "If the hat won't choose our houses, the castle's choosing something else." Ron's face twisted. "I didn't ask it to." Hermione's voice was small. "Neither did I." Harry stared at the dusty classroom, the forgotten desks, the silence. He thought of Adrian's voice. "Divide by loyalty. Offer belonging. Be strong." He thought of Draco's interest. And he realized, with a cold certainty, that this was bigger than school politics. Somewhere inside Hogwarts, ancient magic had decided the houses were no longer the right battlefield. But Hogwarts still expected a battle. They waited until the torchlight outside had shifted, until the castle's groans settled into the softer noises of early morning. Hermione insisted they return before a professor found their beds empty. Ron insisted they never do anything like this again. Harry didn't insist on anything. He simply followed, because following was easier than thinking. When they finally slipped back into the dormitory, the room was still dark. Most students slept. A few stirred, murmuring, but no one woke fully. Harry crawled into his bed and lay staring at the canopy while dawn crept through the cracks in stone. He did not sleep. The next day at breakfast, the first years looked at one another differently. Not openly, not in a way that would invite questions, but in the small ways that mattered. A glance held a fraction too long, a whisper cut off too quickly. Hermione's hands shook as she buttered her toast. Ron ate like he was angry at the food. Harry's scar throbbed faintly, like a bruise pressed by an unseen finger. At the Slytherin table, though Harry knew he shouldn't call it that anymore, Draco sat with Adrian and others. Draco's pale face looked unchanged, but his eyes were too bright. He looked across the hall and met Harry's gaze. Draco smiled. Harry felt cold spread through his chest. Hermione's voice came in a whisper. He knows. Ron's mouth tightened. Let him. Hermione shook her head. No, she whispered. He knows we heard. Harry stared at Draco's smile and remembered Adrian's calm certainty. Everything bleeds. Divide by loyalty. He realized then that the hat's refusal had not removed danger. It had simply removed the school's official way of naming it. Dumbledore rose at the high table, as if he had been waiting for the tension to reach a certain pitch. He lifted his hands. The hall fell quiet in reluctant pieces. My dear students, Dumbledore said, I have a small announcement. Umbridge sat beside him again, smile fixed, eyes glittering. Dumbledore's voice was light, but his eyes were sharp. Hogwarts will begin, as of today, a new system of oversight. Murmurs rose. McGonagall's posture stiffened. Snape's eyes narrowed. Dumbledore continued. To ensure the safety of our students during this transitional year, certain corridors will be restricted. Certain gatherings will require supervision. Umbridge's smile widened slightly. Dumbledore's gaze swept the hall. And, he added softly, I remind you that Hogwarts listens. Harry's fingers tightened around his goblet. Ron leaned in, whispering fiercely. He knows something's happening. Hermione's eyes were fixed on Dumbledore, urgent. Or he suspects. Across the hall, Draco leaned toward Adrian, whispering. Adrian's expression did not change. Harry felt the castle's presence like a weight, ancient and watchful. It had closed doors and opened passages. It had guided and blocked and hidden. It had listened. Harry wondered suddenly what Hogwarts wanted from him. He didn't have time to wonder long. That afternoon, a note appeared on Harry's pillow. It was folded neatly, parchment crisp, no signature. 3 words, written in careful ink. We should talk. Harry stared at it until the letters blurred. Ron saw it and swore. Hermione's face went pale. Who? Ron began. Harry's scar prickled faintly as if answering. Harry swallowed and whispered, Draco. And as if the castle had been waiting for the name, the candle flames in the room flickered once, quick, sharp, like a blink. Harry read the note again, as if repetition might reveal a hidden spell. We should talk. No signature. No flourish. Just the clean certainty of someone who believed they were entitled to Harry's time. Ron paced like a caged thing. Don't, he said, voice low and urgent. Whatever you do, don't. Hermione's fingers were knotted together. We should tell a professor. Ron spun on her. And say what? Malfoy wrote a note. Hermione's eyes flashed. And that we heard them plotting last night. Ron went still, face paling. We can't tell them that. Hermione's voice shook. Why not? Because we weren't supposed to be there, Ron hissed. And Snape would have us scrubbing cauldrons until we're 40. Hermione's mouth tightened, furious and frightened. That's the problem, she whispered. We're already thinking like we have to protect ourselves from the staff as much as from the students. Harry listened to them argue as if from behind glass. His scar tingled faintly. The castle felt attentive. He stood slowly, note still in hand. I need to know what he wants, he said. Ron's eyes widened. Harry, no. Hermione grabbed Harry's sleeve. If you go alone. I won't, Harry said quickly. You'll come. Ron stared, torn between fear and loyalty. This is mad. Hermione swallowed. If we go, she said, voice tight, we choose the place. Somewhere public. Somewhere the castle can't trap us. Harry nodded, though the irony made his stomach twist. The castle trapping them was the only reason they'd escaped last night. He looked around the dormitory. Students laughed softly in the corner, unaware. Lavender was braided by her friend, trying to make normal out of chaos. Neville sat with a book open, eyes not moving, lost in worry. Harry suddenly understood how quickly a school could become two schools. The children who knew what was happening, and the children who didn't yet. Harry folded the note carefully and slid it into his pocket. The parchment felt too heavy for its size. Ron exhaled hard, face set. "Fine," he muttered. "But if he tries anything..." Hermione's wand was already in her hand. "He won't," she said, though her voice held no certainty. "Not if he's smart." Ron snorted. "He's smart enough." Harry moved toward the door. It opened before he touched it, as if anticipating the choice. He paused on the threshold, throat tight. The corridor beyond was dim, torches steady. Ordinary, almost. Behind him, Ron and Hermione stepped close, flanking him like guards. Harry took one breath and stepped out. The door shut softly behind them. In the stone beneath their feet, the latch held fast. Locked not against them, but with them inside it.